You're listening to Honey and Hustle, a video podcast that inspires the dreamers, creators, and hustlers to make a business from their passions. I'm Angela Hollowell, and I'm a visual storyteller based in Durham, North Carolina. I sit down with creative entrepreneurs, nonprofit founders, and small business owners as they share their stories, the lessons they've learned throughout their careers, and how they've worked to make a positive impact. Hey everyone, we are filming season 3 of the Honey and Hustle podcast live at the Durham Bottling Co. right in downtown Durham. We're about to get into a great conversation, but before we do that, I'd really appreciate it if you take a moment to share this episode with someone who you think might get some value from it. Feel free to tag me on the podcast on social media, and I'll be sure to put those links on the video and in the description below. If you're listening to the show, please consider leaving us a review on Podchaser, Apple Podcast, or Spotify. It helps others find the show and lets me know how I'm doing at this video podcast thing. If you'd like to support the show, be sure to check out our affiliate links, shop our merch, and subscribe to the Honeypot newsletter and this YouTube channel, all at the links in the description. Without further ado, let's get into it. I really appreciate you making the time to come out on a Friday afternoon to talk with me a little bit about you and your work and your organization. So,
yeah, no problem. I'm excited.
Yes, absolutely. So for people who are watching or listening, this is Dr. Rhonda Taylor. She is the executive director and founder of We Are. So I don't want to tell too much about you. Obviously, there's a doctor in front of your name, so that's a whole long story in itself. But that also lends itself to the story and origin of We Are. So I would love to hear more about how that came to be.
Yeah, sure. And I will add one thing. It felt good to hear you call me Dr. Rhonda Taylor because Taylor is my maiden name.
Okay.
And I go by Rhonda Taylor Bullock to honor my family name. Also, my husband is a Bullock too. And so rather than being called the other Bullock, I use that and... because he might say, why do you say your last, the Bullock last name? I digress. But Dr. Rhonda Taylor Bullock, yes, I'm glad to be here. Glad for this opportunity to share more about, the work that we're doing.
Yeah. So with your PhD program, obviously PhD programs are super long. And a lot of times when I think of going through a PhD program, what the outcome would be is typically either research or being a professor. So staying kind of in the academia realm rather than I'm going to start my own business or I'm going to start my own organization. So what was that like for you being in a PhD program and saying no, I think this is the route that I want to take?
I was an accidental PhD student, and then I became an accidental entrepreneur.
That's some big accidents.
Of all the accidents to have. And I didn't start out thinking that I was going to start a business. Even the language of entrepreneurship or social justice, entrepreneur, that language wasn't even in my vocabulary. And so I went into my PhD program, Policy, Leadership, and School Improvement, thinking that I was going to gain research skills and research knowledge and use that as an elementary school principal. I wanted to disrupt the early literacy experiences of what was happening to Black and brown boys in elementary school, because at the high school level, I was teaching incoming ninth graders, and so many of them could not read on grade level. So I went into my doctoral program thinking I'm going to gain these research skills, I'm going to better understand these early literacy experiences, and then I'm going to go be a dope elementary school principal, and I'm going to change some trajectories, right, for kids, or at least try to have an impact. And in the midst of being in my doctoral program, this is the fall of 2014. And at that point in our country, George Zimmerman had been acquitted of murdering Trayvon Martin. A white male police officer had murdered Mike Brown.
Yes.
And I'm in the fall. I start my career as a doctoral student as a mother of a 3-year-old and a 3-month-old. So I'm carrying that with me. And then I did my undergrad and master's at UNC. And I started teaching at a historically Black high school. So I was immersed in affirming Black culture and identity. I'm like, this is it, right? And then I reemerged into this historically white space. And I was having racist experiences on a day-to-day basis. And so I kept thinking, this is happening to me. It's not happening to my classmates. It's not happening to my husband. God, what are you trying to tell me? And so I started thinking about, in my research, I wasn't finding racism as a part of the reason Black and brown kids were having issues with literacy. And so I was like, I'm having these experiences. If I really want to study race and racism, which is my passion, then I should study it. So I very much centered critical race theory and critical whiteness studies because I wanted to start to think about, we think about how Black and brown children respond to racism, but what about the perpetrators of racial harm? All of this is happening in my brain, and I started to think about how I want to do anti-racism work on a much more systematic level. And what would that look like? And when I come back to, George Zimmerman, I think about him as an adult, and I'm like, what would have happened for the George Zimmermans of the world? At that moment, I was like, it's too late to do anti-racism work for adults. It's not too late, but in that moment, I was like, it's too late.
Yeah.
And what would it look like if we were to have an emphasis on helping children to develop healthy racial identities? What if we did anti-racism work and talked about skin color and identity and racism with young children? And so that's the idea that came to me first. Like, what if we start earlier on having these conversations and helping children to be healthier, to better understand their race and identity? And then from there, it was like, well, what if you're working with the children, you need to work with their parents too. So now I'm thinking, okay, I'm gonna do something for children, I'm gonna do something for parents. And then, if you're working with children and parents, then you need to bring in the educators too. And so that's how we kind of came into this three-pronged approach. But it started with doing work with children. And the first thing, I really just thought I was gonna do a program and do a summer camp for kids using books to help them think about race, racism, skin color, and activism. That's what I thought I was gonna do. And then somehow it became, well, let's give it a name.
Yeah.
Now we need a logo because we need people to believe in this and take it seriously.
Right.
And, things started to spiral, and I reached out to my husband, who's a co-founder, Dr. Daniel Kelvin Bullock, and then I started reaching out to other people. Like, I'm trying to do this thing. And again, I didn't really know what it was. I'm still thinking at this point, I'm going to be an elementary principal.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to also do this.
Right.
We're used to multitasking, doing
Right.
many things, but that's kind of how it started.
Okay. You used a lot of language that really, even for me as well, wasn't really present and in the forefront of popular culture, let alone subcultures within this country until very recently. In the last couple, I would say, 5 to 7 years, when you said things like anti-racist. So not just not being racist, but actively working against relearning and unlearning certain past behaviors and past prejudices, right? When you talk about being disruptive, like in your email signature, you say with disruptive peace, which I think is hilarious. But I also think flips on this head, I'm still being nonviolent, but I'm still being disruptive. I think there's definitely this element of people who, they're like, okay, well, you can protest, but just don't, disrupt my life. But it's like, no, I need to in order for you to hear me and to see me and to acknowledge me and what I'm saying. And there, again, for somebody who got their master's in peace and human rights, I have a lot of thoughts about peace and the definition of peace, but also very much understand that peace and the fight for peace and the fight for justice should be disruptive. So I really understand that, but I've never put the two together in that way. And then you also talked a little bit about identity and having, language for younger generations of people to talk about identity, talk about their relationship with other people in a way that has scared a lot of people. Yeah. Is scaring a lot of people. And I think with the more language we come up with, unfortunately, for better or for worse, I think the reality is that, when we give things a name, we also give things a calling card. So for people who don't agree, it becomes like, oh, it's just this new thing. And it's like, no, it's always been around. We just have a name for it now. Right. So also making that distinction in the popular culture when you're trying to advocate for certain things is really important. So we're going to get to all of that at some point. But first, I guess we're going to dive more into really the connection between your experience in education and the experience you wanted to create for people at a very young age. So not even waiting till they get to the PhD level of education, but like from the onset, here's the relationship that you should come to expect from your education system as it relates to your relationship with your teachers, with your parents, and with your peers around just becoming a person.
Right.
Really becoming a person who is aware of our history, our correct and accurate and shared history, and what that means for you as you develop as a young person with reading and with other things. So can you talk to me just a little bit about, what that process was like? And when you did start reaching out to people and you said, hey, I'm trying to start this thing, what was some of the early feedback that you got from the work that you were doing?
Yeah, I was very thoughtful about who I reached out to. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to connect with people who already demonstrated an understanding of anti-racism work. Mm-hmm. And so these were folks who were, first it was like my husband, who we do this work together. And then it was colleagues, former colleagues, and really a lot of classmates that I was meeting in the doctoral program. I'm like, I've heard your comments in class. I feel like we're on the same page. Right. Here's this thing I'm trying to do. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned earlier, like some of this language is new. Mm-hmm. So if you go back to 2014, anti-racism was not prominent. No. Talking about white supremacy was not mainstream rhetoric. No. And trying to be disruptive. These things were not. So on the one hand, I was very strategic about who I asked because I was still fragile in trying to, because I feel this is a calling. Mm. And I was still in a spirit of discernment, making sure I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. So I was fragile, I think, and vulnerable too, because I'm also carrying my own stories of harm. Mm-hmm. And people sometimes will think you're crazy. And wrestling with my own folks who were close to me and mischaracterizing the work that I was doing. So it's very intentional about connecting with people whom I already knew I wouldn't have to explain the work to. Yeah. So I'm gonna tell you how to do this, and my expectation is that if you have capacity, you'll do it. But the reason you won't do it will be because of a capacity issue and not because you don't understand why this is relevant. Right. And so I reached out to folks who were friends, who were in classes, some I had just met. And by that point, I knew that this was different for folks. And so I first reached out to my line sister who does marketing, Shannon Williams. And I said, Shannon, can you create a logo for me? This is the title I've come up with. This is the image I'm trying to work with. And she got a logo for me. Mm-hmm. And so I had another friend help me put a packet together. Mm-hmm. And because I felt like I did need to have something to make it a little more concrete and real, to help buffer people's feelings toward it. And so initially, every person that I asked was like, yes, this is something we need to do, and we'll do it. And I asked folks who were, we had representation from the Latinx community, Jewish community, white community, Black community, people who would be considered seniors, senior citizens, people who were just right out of undergrad. And, so it was a diverse group of us coming together. People who learned English as a second language. I mean, it was a diverse group, but it was everyone who already had an anti-racism framework. Mm-hmm.
That's good. That's great. So you got like-minded people together, but still diverse people. And I think that's a good recognition and distinction now, because I think a lot of times when it comes to jobs and working with people, people want to hire people that are like-minded, right? And sometimes that also means alike in everything else. Yeah. And so it's good to have they are like-minded, but they also bring a different perspective of what it means to be anti-racist and their own experience with race and identity in this country. So that's also great to hear and just great to see. When it comes to, you connecting your work with, not only say connecting your work, but really taking advantage of the moment that we're in now as we have grown more into having these conversations, and using some of these language and some of these frameworks to start the conversation, to explain what it is you're doing and trying to accomplish, but also bring that down to a level where everybody can understand it anywhere, whatever their education level is. What has that been like from a nonprofit perspective? Because I think when I started, my business in 2016, even then, people were saying like, hey, whatever your political views are, don't share them. Don't share them on social media. Keep it to yourself. Make your money. Go home. You know what I mean? Try to be, and I like that was also the way of like being palatable. Like try to be palatable to people, right? But like I've seen your Twitter. That is, you are not worried about that at all. So what has that been like? I mean, I know there's probably people every once in a while that will come on there and like mess with you, but for the most part, it hasn't deterred you. No. So what has that been like too as you move forward with these, you know, diverse group of people? You know, you're going to meet opposition. That's just naturally. So like, what has that opposition been like as you've been trying to have these conversations?
You know, initially when we first started, and I would get asked that question a lot, because a lot of people are like, oh my God, you're doing this in schools? What is the pushback? And I'm like, it was non-existent.
Really?
It was, I feel like it was by purpose, by design. Yeah. But we were invited into spaces and so many doors were open for whom others it was closed. Mm. And I think one of the pieces of it was starting with relationships, people that I knew first. Yeah. And because I taught for almost 10 years, so I had a network of educators who already trusted me. Mm-hmm. And so I think that was part of it. But now, you know, we're post the 2016 election, we're post Charlottesville. Mm-hmm. We're post that time period, but not the impact. Right. It's a resonance, right? Mm-hmm. A residue.
Yeah, we're past January 6th.
I mean, so you have all these other things. So in the midst of these forward-thinking, like anti-racism moments, you have that white lash. Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. And now in this moment, I had to make up in my mind that this work needs to be done regardless. Mm-hmm. I'm not beholden to your contract. I'm not beholden to your finances. I'm going to be unapologetic about this work. Mm-hmm. And because I know I stand on the word. Like, I believe this is my calling. I believe that I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. Mm-hmm. And that is, and I have to do it. Mm-hmm. And, you know, and that doesn't mean I'm right every time. I have to check myself, and other people will check me, and I'm like, you right. You know, but I'm not going to let that deter me. And if you call Rhonda, or you want We Are to show up in the space, this is the package. Yeah. I don't do DEI work, and this is not a shot at DEI work. Anti-racism work and talking about white supremacy is very different from diversity, equity, inclusion, and that's okay. Right. But when you call me, I'm not gonna shy away from what I believe I'm purposed to do. Mm-hmm. And when I tell you what that is, if that's not where you all are, then that's okay. Right. Then you need to find someone to meet you where you are and can take you all, you know, where you need to go. Now, I do meet people who aren't there yet, but they want to be there. Anti-racism work. And so I meet them where they are and we go together. Mm-hmm. So it, you know, eliminates some of that tension. And that's just what it is. I'm going to be who I am, and especially right now in this anti-CRT movement, anti-critical race theory movement. Mm-hmm. And you have a lot of people in education who really don't understand what CRT is, but because there's this, you know, conservative push who's taking up a lot of space, they have a lot of microphone power, mm-hmm. And then people are like, well, we don't do CRT. We don't do this in our schools. We don't teach that. And my response is, if you find a school that's leading with a CRT framework, you found a good thing. Yeah. Tell me where that is, because that's where I want to send my child. Yeah. And so rather than, you know, we have in this later period, we have had some contract relationships and consultancies with like some school systems where they're like, oh, we can't pay for critical race theory work. Mm-hmm. Okay, we can do critical race theory. So if you want to work with us, like I'm gonna tell you, this is what we're gonna say. Right. And so if this doesn't work for you, fine. It does. You know, on the one hand, I'm like, well, cool. We're gonna keep going where people understand the work, and that's where we're gonna be. And at the same time, it's like you don't even understand.
You don't know what it is.
You don't know what it is, and you're allowing these people who have a loud mouth, you know, to taint. This is critical race theory is such important work. Mm-hmm. It's truth telling. What you were saying, mm-hmm. rooted in, this is reality. This is our truth. This is our history. Mm-hmm. And so I try not to defend critical race theory. I try to pretty much say, this is what it is and this is what we do. Yeah. And these are the benefits of it. So.
Right. So one thing I do want to say before I go into that next question is you made a really good distinction between DEI work and anti-racism work. So to me, DEI honestly was made within the context of the workplace because that's where majority of people spend majority of their time. In school as well, because you spend a lot of time in school. So those are kind of the two places where DEI was kind of frameworked in,
Right.
where that was meant to go to provide inclusive and healthy workspaces. The thing about, in my mind, about anti-racism is not necessarily about creating diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. This is about acknowledging all the ways that we as people, not just as workers, not just as students, but people, have maybe not acknowledged our privilege in the past. We have not correctly acknowledged our history and how that affects us now in the present. All right, so I feel like that is a different step from working towards building a healthy workplace, in that anti-racism is actively working to be a better person and to be a better neighbor and to be a better citizen and to be a better accommodator who is respectful of other cultures and that sort of thing.
Right, and to have better systems.
Right.
Right, and so
Yeah.
how do we look at the school system? How do we look at this job?
Right.
And now apply this framework and to do better.
Yeah, because racism too is the misconception is like this is an individual thing. This is
Right.
like no, like this is embedded into our systems and our institutions, and until those things changed, the work on the ground will not change. So going back to that CRT, or going back to anti-racism frameworks and peace building, if you will, what are some ways, like straight up, a lot of people who probably like are railing against CRT or just like this type of education system, they're not reading books. They're not reading they haven't read the 1619 Project. They haven't read like other books that would educate them about like race and identity. They haven't read Hood Feminism. They haven't read.
Oh my gosh! Oh, I love that book.
You know?
No, they didn't.
They're not reading that, you know? So, like, if adults aren't reading that, like, how are you bringing that topic to them, too, who they're probably not going to go home and do homework after this? Like, how are we addressing, like, the gap that lies between, like, young people and their parents?
Yeah, because most people are reading tweets and Facebook posts.
Yeah.
You know, and headlines,
Yeah.
and not the articles.
Right.
Right, and so what we're doing is creating these spaces where learning can happen. And so some of what we do at We Are is we have these outward facing public events, and we're inviting people in to come to learn. And then we make ourselves available for businesses, organizations, parent-led organizations, community-led organizations to invite us into their space to have this shared learning experience. Sometimes we are asked, but what are you doing about those folks over there, the ones who won't come? And so one of the ways that I respond to that is those people are not our responsibility.
Right.
I tell people the people who are meant to be in this room are here, and that we all need this learning. You can be the most well-intentioned person and still be contributing to harm and still upholding white supremacy in our practices, and we do this. And so what I tell folks is that those people are your responsibility. After you leave here, because you're going back, because you know them. They're in your community. They're at your dinner table. They're at your cookouts, your pig picking, or whatever you're eating, or whatever, your churches,
Yeah.
your HOA board.
Yeah.
Now, your job is to take this knowledge because you have a relationship. Because oftentimes the ways to be in community with those people to learn is you need to have a relationship with them. And so we tell folks that's your responsibility. You go out back into your community with those people who might be family, who might be friends, and now you're a part of doing this education. That's the work you carry. And I want to racialize that. Like, I really tell that to white folks. Like, that is your job to go back and be in community and have those conversations. You do not get to close your door and say, in my house, we're doing a good thing, and we're different from those white people over there.
Right.
And so I like to tell them very directly, no, that is your responsibility.
Right. No, that makes so much sense. And then in the business world, what you really did was like, you are my target audience, right? If you believe and are moved so much by this product that we're giving you, this education, this learning, go and tell other people about it, right? And that's the best, word of mouth is the best referral. Having these conversations are the best referral. You know, when somebody, let's say white, comes to an event that you're hosting and then they go back in their community with their cousin who probably is a big Trump supporter or whatever, or, you know, and you're having these conversations with them, it's not about beating them over the head and asking them to come to an event. It's about saying, well, this is what I've learned recently. This is what I believe. And this is what I'm hearing from you when you say this, right? So small changes in behavior that prompts people to just think.
Right.
To just think more deeply about what they're saying and the things that they are doing with their actions. It's like you say you're not racist, but
and this is what you do. And I do want to say that doesn't mean that everybody with whom we come into contact with is agreeable or understands the work that we're doing. So sometimes we're in spaces where a whole staff was made to come to the workshop. Or we're in a space where someone thought they were on an anti-racism journey, and then when they got there and started learning and feeling uncomfortable, they were not as far along as they thought they were. So we do get pushback within sessions, within the spaces where we were invited to come, or people willingly came themselves. So I do want to put that caveat out there that we do get pushback. We do have to stop people. We do have to say, you've taken up enough space, and we're going to stop this conversation right here.
Okay.
And that does happen, from time to time. And as facilitators, we just try to be prepared for it and be conscious of it, because sometimes things can happen, and it might catch you off guard, and so you're not able to respond in the moment. But we do have conversations around that as a staff. So if you hear this, then do this.
Right.
So we do try to be prepared for when that does come up in our spaces.
Yeah. So one thing we talked about before we got to rolling here, and one thing that I do want to address about you being a nonprofit founder is that, with business, when people think about business, and nonprofits are a business, in my point of view, we think about, how many sales can I make versus how much impact can I have. So that's one distinction between nonprofits and for-profit businesses. The other thing is I kind of see nonprofits as like education as a service type deal. Right, so for people who own service-based businesses, they're coaches, they're consultants, they're speakers, what have you, and you have these moments where people think they're ready to have a conversation, think they're ready to experience transformation, which is one of the biggest, I would say, selling points of having someone like you and We Are come in to a space and do something is, man, I want to be a change person. I want this to have an impact on me. I want this to just drive me to be better and do better in my community and teach me something about myself that can help me be better and contribute better as a person. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think that's great to go in a space and want that from a service-based professional and to have confidence that they can deliver. Right. The other half of that is when you as a facilitator have to say, I'm also here to take up space because I'm qualified to take up space because my lived experience is valid. And because I also want to help people really reach within themselves and look at their own lives and see what lived experiences they have had that maybe they experience differently now that they have new language to describe certain things. So as you're going through this and you're kind of thinking about it like that, funding also inevitably comes to mind.
Right.
So you are funded differently than a for-profit. Do you feel comfortable talking about?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
So one of the things... So initially, I applied for a social entrepreneurial grant at UNC Chapel Hill through their Campus Y. It was called CUBE, and it was like an incubator space. And I was I didn't even realize, but I was very uncomfortable with being labeled as a business owner because of everything we've been conditioned to believe and the harm, and that this is a business. And it is a business. Right. And you have to be able to stay afloat, to do the work that you want to do. And so I also realized that the business, that language has been stereotypically white, male-centric. And there's been just lots of harm. And so we got to decolonize what does it mean and then reimagine what it means to be a social entrepreneur or a business person. Correct. And so I'll say that at first because it definitely made me really uncomfortable at first. I don't know, I'm not a business owner. I just run a business. But when it comes to funding, and when you think about nonprofits, you think about doing work for free, and grants and all this other kind of stuff. And one of the things, and I don't even know where this came from, and then I believe it was divine intervention, like I knew that I needed to charge people for our services. Okay. So the services that we offer, so we first started with a conference. The Let's Talk Racism conference, which is the one we just wrapped up in March. when I was an undergrad at UNC, I was a part of a collective of educators who had received like the North Carolina Teaching Fellow Scholarship, and so some of the more seasoned folks who were there when I was there started something called the Let's Talk Race Conference, Racial Attitudes and Conversations in Education. That's what RACE stood for. And so I knew that conversation needed to come back. So working with my partner and our friends and stuff, and we want to do a Let's Talk Racism conference. And so I knew we had no money. We're not about to have no conference and invite a speaker. These speakers out here charging thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
You got to feed them. They got to have print, and it's like you can't do this for free.
Right.
And so I knew and also people also value things that they pay for. But in the education space, we wanted to be accessible to where if an educator did not get support from their school system to come, could it still be financially feasible for them to participate? And so that first year of the conference, now we had some seed funding from CUBE. We built a partnership with the Sammy Du Bois Cook Center on Social Equity at Duke. Okay. So they put out some seed money for this conference to happen, but then we also charged people. And then from there, we did a summer camp.
Okay.
You can't host summer camps for free. It's really hard. Like if you can't host them. A lot of people have free summer camp programming, but then you got these people out here doing this work, and then you can't pay them for it. So I knew we need to have some fees associated with the work that we did, and that's kind of in some ways it's not what you get from traditional grassroots nonprofit organizations, right? And in particular, if you're working with marginalized communities, it is hard. Like we don't have that excess income,
right?
And so on the one hand, I knew that we needed to charge people for things, at least the people who could pay. Like with our camp, we offer full and partial scholarships, which means we have to bust our rear ends to cover the funds for them. And then, we have write grants to try to keep us afloat. But you know what? When we first started, because remember, go back, I said anti-racism word. People were still scared of it. People kept calling me radical this and radical that, and why you got a black fist in your logo. And I did get some of that.
Okay.
We had to, the grants were not coming. It was the people. The people on the ground who trusted me, with whom I already had relationships with, and then word of mouth. It's $5 and $10 donations that kept us afloat, and also like our board. Our board was also became colleagues, and many of us were working for free. It was a lot of donated time to get us off the ground because we could not compensate people, and they didn't want to be compensated. Like I think that's beautiful how giving they were. But we were able to raise funds through donations, and then, one grant here, one grant there. But then after the world witnessed Officer Chauvin murdering George Floyd, then people were like, oh, wait, racism, we're not post-racial.
No.
Barack Obama didn't
cure racism.
You mean Barack Obama didn't cure racism?
But I voted for him. What do you mean? I can't be racist.
And so the flood of donations, I'm telling you, our average donation was probably like $15, but it was a lot of people believing in us. I think that's such a blessing that the people of us doing this grassroots, the people closest to the pain and the problems, like we were funding this work. Then we started getting business donations, and so they're throwing in more money. Like we're not financially comfortable. We're financially comfortable. We're not above. Like we still having to do work and apply for grants and things, but those that's kind of how our finances have worked. Like we've definitely we went from we couldn't even afford one person. Like I was running the organization full time, and from a place of privilege because my husband had a full-time job with the school system, so I want to name that. But then after. In 2020, for one, I went to my board and I said, y'all, I can't do this work by myself no more. By myself meaning being the one person in the office running the business.
Right.
Like there's a difference between being on the board and running the business. One person cannot run this business anymore. The demand is too great and we need to raise some funds. And it just so happened the year that we had committed to trying to push ourselves to raise $100,000 so we can get colleagues. We went live with our fundraiser, and then right after that, Chauvin murdered George Floyd.
Okay.
And so I want to uplift that we benefited off the backs of black bodies. And I want the community to know we're doing what we should be doing with that, right?
Yeah.
And so then we hired 3 new people. Now we're an office of 4.
Nice.
And doing more, and then recognizing we can use 4 more people. So
Yeah, that's good. I think, man, I don't even know. We can get into it a little bit if you feel comfortable, but there recently, for people watching, listening, we are recording this in April. And so if you pay attention to this space at all, the Black Lives Matter movement has been under fire recently, because they too have benefited in terms of donations from the lives of Black and brown people who have been in the news. And they recently came under fire because it came out that they had this mansion, this $6 million mansion that was funded through donations in New York that nobody was using. And a lot of the founders and people who were in leadership there have come out trying to reconcile with that and maybe explain why it exists. And they've received a lot of pushback because people are like, okay, this is cool that you wanted to create this hub and this incubator, but Ferguson also wanted to do a community center and y'all denied them that money. And as a nonprofit, people are giving to you. We expect a return on that, right? Even if you had came out and said, we've been paying people with this, we've been doing all these things, that would be one thing, right? But, the founders kind of came out and said, well, just straight up, we weren't really prepared to run a nonprofit, and the amount of money that we got in the time span that we got it was just absolutely insane. We didn't know what to do with it. And that is really hard. I know that was hard for them to admit, that they made a mistake. And they leverage people's trust in them and have benefited from that. I don't know what's going on with the space. I don't really know. They said that things were happening and that the space they got required a lot of renovations, so that's where a lot of the money went. But $6 million is still $6 million. You know what I'm saying? Imagine what you could do with $6 million. You know what I mean? That could go to a lot of different things. But people do, to an extent, especially with nonprofits too, because people feel like what is happening with the funds should be publicly available, right. And that you, as well as other business owners, should be beholden to your constituents and to your audience and to the people who have supported you. What has, I don't even know, I don't know if you're interested in giving your take on that, or what you have kind of done to increase transparency within your nonprofit.
Yeah, I will say I don't know enough to speak from a well-informed perspective.
Yeah.
I do know that it is very hard to run a nonprofit, especially when when you didn't even know that that's what you were doing in the first place. I don't think that excuses anyone, but I will say is that that's probably a nuanced, complicated situation, and I hope that truth and transparency emerges from this, and it doesn't detract from Black Lives Matter. Right. And so that's what I'll say there.
But I definitely think it does. I hate to say it, but I definitely think the sentiment that I've seen is how can we trust this?
Yeah.
And that's really hard because they were coming under fire since day one. People were really upset, and now you have years later this. More than anything, probably is this juggernaut of an accusation
that feeds into some of the critiques that people had of you.
Yeah.
And you just hate it because there's people, we're still being harmed.
Yeah.
And it makes it hard for people to trust us because we're already Black and brown and women and trying to do this work. And but yeah, I think I need to better understand, get more information on the story and make sure that I learn from what they're doing. So on our end, with Truth and Transparency, we're learning what does that look like as a business organization, right? I did a video when I first started the nonprofit, and I was just saying that the learning curve is sharp. This is completely new for me. Financial feasibility wasn't in my vocabulary before when I was teaching high school English. But I will say on our end, being honest, showing people what when we raise funds, this is what we're raising funds for. Right. So when we had put out that $100,000 fundraising goal, we're trying to hire 3 people. And then people are like, Rhonda, you can't pay 3 people with $100,000. I was like, I know, but it feels wrong to ask for more. But once we get them on, they are fund generating positions. So then they will be able to supplement, hopefully, the income, because we'll be able to take on more consultancy. And so we didn't have to raise all 3 of their salaries in that one fundraiser. And then we're working on understanding impact reports. And then in addition to impact reports showing this is what we raised, this is how we're spending the money. And we're hoping to have our first impact report out, but it costs money to have an impact report. And we're getting there. It is a process. Even though we've been doing this officially, as an organized body since 2015, the majority of our board were also full-time PhD students when we first started. This just became my sole full-time job, I think, in 2018.
Okay.
So, but then even with what we have now, we're always saying this money is going towards scholarships for kids, for our summer camp. And then we tell people, these are the number of scholarships that we've been able to cover. But I think we have room to grow. And I do feel, I appreciate, and I name this a lot, the trust that people have in us. And I would not want to do anything. Let me say, we're not about to buy. That feels like a judgmental statement. I appreciate the trust that the people put in us, and I don't want to do anything to damage that trust, because so much of us even being here was built on trust. And so I'm better understanding what transparency looks like there. Because as a teacher, it was, here's my grade book.
Yeah.
And here are my lesson plans. And, and here's my call log. And I'm trained and I understand that I need to do that. And so in this space, I'm learning a lot. I've made a lot of mistakes. I've had a lot of lessons learned. And hope that we have a demonstrated history of improvement, of trying to do better. And I think that's how we, you own up to when you've made a mistake, and then show how. Because none of us are perfect. I could still be in this moment saying all of these things and go back and recognize I've made a financial error. We have to own it and then reconcile the situation. This is what I'm doing to fix it. And that's kind of how we try to operate.
Yeah. No, that's good. One thing I will say to Black Lives Matter credit, which is why I don't have heavy critiques of them publicly or otherwise really, is because at one point, when Black Lives Matter first started, it was a lot about the protest and the awareness and that sort of thing. And people who were not advocates or proponents of Black Lives Matter were saying, okay, well, you made all this noise, but now what? That's not the only job of a nonprofit. And are you saying that only Black Lives Matter? And they had to kind of go back and do some of that business building, no, this is intersectional, it's not just Black lives. It is Black and brown people, it's queer people, it's all these other things.
All Black lives matter.
Right. And going to talk, more deeply about what they believe and really having to go back and do some business building, foundation building, rather than just capacity building. So having all these chapters and stuff. So that was number one. They did have to go back, but they did do the work. And then the second thing they did was they started doing more policy kind of direction. So trying to craft and propose policy that would in turn increase systemic change. So in terms of that, there was some things that again, they also had to learn on the fly. It's not just about getting people out in the streets and social media hashtags and stuff. It's also about what does this mean at the end of the day for all these people who are acknowledging and recognizing what's happening on the policy level, on the systemic level, that is intersectional racism. But yeah, that's just...
It's a lot. And that another thing that was intimidating to me, and I can name this in starting We Are, people kept talking to me about scale. How are you going to scale this? How are you going to, because that's business language.
Right.
And I was like, I'm not trying to scale. And what do you mean? It felt overwhelming. And also I do understand, my prayer was, I don't want to stifle We Are's impact because of my fear of growth. And, because people are, you could do this worldwide, you could do this. And I'm like, that feels overwhelming. And it's a lot. You can't just, I've tried to be more methodical in our growth and more thoughtful, because I believe in building relationships. You can't bring 100 people in and expect you about to have, deep relationship, because I think this work is deeply relational, it's deeply personal, it's deeply personal to me because of my racist encounters that I've had. And people are like, we want to be in this state and do this. I'm like, actually, I don't. I want to grow deep relationships here. I want to have a triangulate. I want to have a community like Durham. I feel like we are able to have that, touch all three of our triangles, right? Children, families, and educators. Like, we're trying to grow deep here. And I also recognize the need for this work to expand. I mean, we're already working throughout the state. And I will say, because of COVID and Zoom, we have an international reach. But the goal isn't to be international. The goal is to be disruptive. The goal is to challenge white supremacy. And so we're trying to do that in a gradual way, recognizing our own capacity, because when you start to think of the whole of this, it's overwhelming and it's taxing. We've built in, and I don't have a good work-life balance. I'm working on it.
Yeah, aren't we all? Jesus Christ.
I'm not the model. But I will say, in bringing colleagues in, they helped me to see how I was doing the absolute most. Because they were like, we can't go and do this 7 days a week like you're doing, Rhonda. I'm like, oh, I had y'all working 7 days. It wasn't 7. It was about 6, though. And I was like, oh, you're right. Oh, I shouldn't be doing this either, huh? But when you're trying to get something started, that's kind of where you are. You're trying to keep it going. But you have to check growth. And is growth wasn't my goal. Impact, like where we started, impact was the goal. And I do believe in ripple effects and being able to share this education that we've co-created and get it out to a broader audience, but in due time.
Right.
And people can ask me, what's your 5-year plan? What's your 5-year plan? First of all, didn't have a plan for this, and I said, well, you know what? God gave me this vision, and when he's ready for me to have a 5-year plan, then he'll give it to me. And I don't know my 5-year plan.
Yeah.
And actually, I'm bothered you keep asking me, but that's that business world. We're going to be in 5 years. I don't know. Now, I will say last year, I did feel a little clarity around 5 years out. And then I kind of spoke to our team and shared with the team, this is what I think we should be doing over the next 5 years. And that came to me, I think that was year 6 for us. So now I'm ready to speak to, because the vision came to me. So I'm not trying to force something that's not there. And I kind of appreciate how God gave me that grace to say, I don't have to have a 5-year plan if I don't want to. And I'm confident in telling you that, as y'all keep asking me this.
Yeah, no, that's hilarious. But I do think, like, when you think about growth, it has to come back to your why. Is your growth always tied to money? Is that your only goal, just to make a bunch of money by year 5 or whatever this is in your 5-year plan? Or is it to do something else? And I think sometimes too, that's people will say, they look to these arbitrary numbers, oh, how I made $1 million by 30 years old, or how I did. And it's like, okay, that's cool. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, but that doesn't mean that just because you didn't make $1 million a year by 30 that you have a bad quality of life, or that you're not successful in your own right, or you're not accomplishing the goals that you set for yourself. So it's kind of like we have to, and I say this too, I mean, I see it on Twitter, I see it in a lot of, mainstream podcast type stuff, is or just business type stuff, is we have to let go of these arbitrary goals.
Yeah.
We got to let go of this, whatever we think we're supposed to have by a certain age or by a certain time in business. It's everybody's path is different, and really, as long as you're chugging away at the goals that you have for yourself,
right,
then that's what needs to be the most important, not this whatever number that people are throwing out there that you feel like you're supposed to have.
Yeah, and we in our organization we have some awesome colleagues too, and we're trying to create a workspace that none of us have ever experienced. We're reimagining what a healthy work environment looks like. Also recognizing that we're carrying toxic, we've been trained in toxic workspaces and toxic culture, so we have to check our toxic culture that we're bringing, because it's normalized for us and it's out of habit. And then we're having to reimagine together what a healthy workspace looks like. One of the things that I'm proud of that we came to the conclusion of was that one of my colleagues, Sierra, she said that, we're on the front lines of white supremacy. And you need a break from that.
Yeah.
And so when we have multi-day events, the next day is a wellness day.
Okay.
But we're taking time off. I did realize with the conference, so we all had the following Monday off, but we worked on a Saturday. We need to recoup that time too. That was for our family, our friends, or just for ourselves. So now next year we're going to have that Monday and that Tuesday off.
Yeah.
Because we need that rest. We need our wellness day, and we also need our weekend day back because we traditionally work during the week, and so just prioritizing health and wellness in ways that's not the norm or the culture for a lot of organizations. Some people have already found that truth and decolonized that aspect of working. And so we're stumbling along and we're having conversations to help us figure out what makes sense for us.
Yeah. And that's important too. Just like, again, going against the grain of saying like, well, this is what a social entrepreneur is. And it's like, well, no, this is what we do because this is what's worked best for us. And that manifests itself in different ways, for sure. Whether that's a 4-day work week or, like you said, just taking a mental health day, which would be just a non-starter for a lot of jobs even now.
Right,
It's just like, I need a day. For what? To be away from you.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, because it's preposterous that we could have a life outside of work. And I think, too, like you were saying, like you have to learn, and myself, probably people watching this, too, is like you are not your work. Like there needs to be some distinction, there needs to be some separation, there needs to be some like break from this. So yeah, I think that's a good note to end on. I appreciate you so much for coming in today.
Yay.
I had a great time.
I did too.
Can you tell people how to find out more about We Are online?
Yes.
Yeah, you can.
This is like real time. Please visit our website at weare-nc.org. You can follow us on social media at weare_org, and we love to engage with folks through social media. You can also email our office at admin, ADMIN, at weare-nc.org. We'd love to hear from you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it. Thanks for having me.